Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Greetings to Yang Berusaha, Professor Dr. Sufyan Jusoh, Director, Institute of Malaysian and International Studies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum and good morning. Welcome to the Implementing Decent Work Agenda in Sabah Palm Oil Sector, Embodying Collective Transformations Program. We are also streaming live from UKM official Facebook page, so do follow us on our social media platform. Without further ado, I would like to invite Yang Berusaha, Dr. Sufyan Jusoh, to deliver his welcoming remarks. Please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi. Thank you very much, Farizan. I would like to welcome all of you to this important meeting. I would like to acknowledge Associate Professor Dr. Nolan Khalid, the chairholder of the MPOB Endowment Chair at the Faculty of Ekonomi. Encik Shahnas from MPIC, Puan Nadia, Miss Jodeline Mitra, Cik Wan Kasim, Miss Mary Baltazar, and also Herr Nicola from the Swiss Embassy. This is a very important event for us because we are actually looking into the labor situation in Sabah, which is one of the most important topics. If we go for any international event, international trade negotiation, labor standard is one of the big issues in the TPP negotiation. For example, Malaysia has just ratified the CPTPP, and we are negotiating with EFTA and also with the EU. So labor standards is becoming a very important topic in any trade negotiation and trade agreements, and also in investment issues. So for us, I would like to really congratulate Dr. Andika Abdul Wahab and also Dr. Muhammad Falik Abdul Razak from the Institute of Malaysian and International Studies, who have worked hard, went to the ground in Sabah to complete this report, the situational analysis report on labor situations in Sabah palm oil sector. And this is part of our continuous support for the MPOB UKM Endowment Chair on international issues. And this is also part of our continuous support for young researchers to pursue their research on topics related to trade. And for many years, we have been working closely with international organizations, with ASEAN. We are now part of the Malaysian delegate to the high-level task force for the future of ASEAN after 2025. And one of the big issues, of course, is the implementation of the ASEAN Economic Community, and also on the question of mobility of labor within ASEAN. And we are also working closely with APEC, the ASEAN, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. In 2020, we work closely with the APEC Secretariat and also Malaysia as the host to publish several policy papers relating to responsible business conduct, including corporate issues and respect to human rights and mainstreaming of ESG agenda into the current business and investment climate. And our activities with APEC and also together with the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI, has also brought in one project. Yesterday, we just received an approval from APEC Secretariat in Singapore, providing some $20,000 funding for Dr. Andika to further implement a new project on responsible business and investment. So we will be publishing guidelines on responsible business and investment, not just for Malaysia, but also for the 21 APEC economies throughout the world. And for this project, we will be working together with the OECD, who has expressed their interest in working with IKMAS and UKM on elaborating and providing trainings and capacity building on responsible business and investment. And we are also supporting the Malaysian government on the Malaysia EFTA Free Trade Agreement, which also include labor and palm oil issues. As we understand, during the EFTA Indonesia negotiation, there was a referendum held in Switzerland to approve the particular provision on palm oil, and we hope the Malaysia EFTA negotiation will have more or less a similar provision on palm oil and labors. So as we all know, we are one of the largest producers of palm oil. We used to be the largest, but because of the land area and labor mobility issues, we are now the second largest after Indonesia. But of course, we know that many of the companies operating palm oil plantation and business out of Indonesia, Malaysians too. So we are facing a lot of issues, such as the issues in with the European Union. In May this year, for example, we had one-day forum at the World Trade Institute in Bern, Switzerland, together with our colleagues from the World Trade Institute. One of the big issues was the European concerns about the various issues and standards practiced in the palm oil sector. And we also had one session in London, together with our colleagues from Portsmouth University and also the British Institute for Human Rights, where we discuss issues. So some of us, I think here you will also you also participated in those two events, which I think is very important. So associated with this palm oil, which is a very versatile product, there has been growing criticism on negative impacts of palm oil, often associated with land clearance, deforestation, and endangered wildlife. More recently, there have been growing exposures on the alleged labor rights violation, including incidents of child and forced labor in the sector. But I think one of the issues which palm oil producing countries face, especially in the small holdings, is the incidence of children working in the palm oil plantation. It's not that they are forced to, it's for the fun of it, because it's in your backyard. You go to the your father's or mother's small holding, you help your parents. It's actually your playground. So this is something that maybe Europeans or the Americans fail to acknowledge. Not all children working or having fun at the palm oil estates or plantation are actually forced labor. But of course, there are incidents of where children engage as child labor in the palm oil sector. So these are the issues that we normally discuss with our colleagues in Europe and also in other parts of the world. And we have received mixed reaction from these stakeholders as to how Malaysia is progressing towards achieving sustainable and responsible business in the palm oil sector. One of the major concerns raised by stakeholders is the lack of progress on responsible labor practices in the palm oil sector. So I'm very grateful, and I would like to thank and congratulate once again Dr. Andika and Dr. Falik, and also the MPOB chair. And I would like to thank MPOB also for providing this funding for this project. We have to support this project into the future as one of the agenda on the sustainability in the palm oil sector, to strengthen labor standards compliance in meeting with emerging global commodity market requirements. We should also take this opportunity to highlight social norms and cultural traditions underpinning the way we produce palm oil products, and the complexity in the upstream supply chains in the global south. As one of the largest palm oil producers in the world, Malaysia should take the leadership to demonstrate progress and pledges that palm oil is not only environmental friendly, but also socially responsible. So I'm pleased to see the presence of many distinguished speakers today, and experts, researchers, and practitioners to join us and to discuss these important issues. So I look forward to have a more elaborate discussion throughout the day, and I wish you a very good discussion. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Prof. Sufyan. Before we move on to the next agenda, we will have a quick photography session. Everyone, please rise and stay put. The photographer will come to the front to take the picture. Please be seated. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Andika Wahab and Dr. Muhammad Falik Abdul Razak from IKMAS as the grant recipients of MPOB-UKM Endowment Chair to present on embodying collective transformation, sharing of the recommended policy interventions and business actions to implement decent work. Please welcome.
Assalamualaikum. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Nampak ya? Selamat pagi. Yang bahagia Profesor Dr. Sufyan Jusoh, our Director dekat IKMAS. Timbalan Dekan Fakulti Ekonomi. Yang bahagia Prof, Chairholder MPOB-UKM, Endowment Chair, Associate Professor Dr. Nolin. Our esteemed speakers, kita dah jumpa last week. We had met actually last week. Jody from ISIS, ILO, International Labour Organization. We have Mr. Kasim from FGV Holdings. We have Mr. Shahnas from MPIC, and Your Excellency from the Embassy Sweden, and the rest of the participants. And we also had participants virtually actually participated us. And before we start, well, basically our session is not the highlight. The highlight would be the panel session with the expert speakers. But just to provide you the background of the discussion as well, and also take this opportunity to highlight our report that we had conducted for the past months this year. Yeah, and I would like to also acknowledge our associate researcher. We had Willa, who has been a senior social activist, know very well the situation in Sabah. And we have Mary Ann Baltazar, who using her another head as Anak Society, co-founder of Anak Society, also aware situation in Sabah. I think these two are quite important. We have Hani as well, who has been immensely contributed to our fieldwork in Sabah, who is now working for not-for-profit organizations, specifically in the palm sector. And we have, I'm not sure if BK is here, but I think BK has left. So these are the people that actually help us conducting the fieldwork in Sabah. It's a very long research fieldwork, and they're also part of the design process of the study. So now, okay. So this is the title. I don't know, I think everyone has a copy of this printed version of our report. And we have also made it available on our website. You can actually go to our website, IKMAS. You simply Google IKMAS, and you will find it on the front page of our website. but we haven't launched it yet. So I guess for courtesy, we have to wait for our dean or deputy dean of the faculty to launch it by the end of this program. Then, it's freely accessible, and we will also socialize it now across different platforms. So this is the study. It's if you look at the contents. Oh. Yeah. Gerak tak gerak? So okay. So this is the content. The content actually the same as you can see in the report. It's mirroring the report entirely, but I don't think we will go through them one by one. We will just highlight some of them. And if you have question, of course, you can ask us. Yeah. So let me start with the introduction and the background. Why actually we do this research? And I'm sure you know that there has been a sort of a growing studies and publication out there talking about workers' precariousness in Sabah. And there's been also pressure to the industry players, not only industry players, but also country as a whole. But what we observe from this body of knowledge is the tendency to actually disregard or at the same time don't provide context in Sabah, because in Sabah there has been a complexity not only in the social fabric but also in the governing of the supply chain in Sabah. We have many layers of industry players, where large growers, we have medium-sized growers, we have small growers, we have FFB dealers also at the same time, right? So it's complex. So what we actually aim to achieve for this report is to actually play a fair balance between what the workers face and what the growers at the same time face in terms of challenges and barriers in moving forward in transforming the labor compliance, especially in the palm sector. So that has been our background or foundation of our study. So I skipped some of the background, but just give you a quick run through of the objective of the study. Yeah. Skip this. Okay. So the first objective of the study was actually to identify the gaps between employment laws, but in Sabah we focus specifically on Sabah Labor Ordinance and the intersect with social compliance. So we are looking at Sabah Labor Ordinance in alignment with the MSPO and RSPO. So these are the two social compliance schemes that we are looking at. Yeah, and that's the first. And followed by we identify the gaps in awareness and practices on both sides. As we said before, we are interested to look at from both perspective, not just workers, but also growers, in terms of their awareness and practice on decent work. The third, from that, we will develop we actually develop the practical recommendation. One side is for business action and the other side is for policy intervention. So these two pillars actually shaping the way we wrap up the study as a whole. Yeah. Quickly about the decent work agenda. So we choose decent work agenda because this has been the agenda that shapes the way country develops our development policies, including policy on labors. So the other thing as well, why we choose decent work agenda, because it has been the foundation as well for RSPO. You can find the words of decent work in RSPO as well as MSPO. At least for MSPO, we have decent wage being mentioned in the report. So that's why we choose decent work agenda. And there are 4 pillars there: pillar 1, pillar 2, pillar 3, pillar 4. And these are actually the pillars that if we fulfill these pillars, they are considered as enabling pillars. It's easy for us to transform the way we practice labor and compliance as well. So a quick background of our fieldwork. So it's not many. We covered 3 large growers. 1 large grower, RSPO certified. 1 is in the midst of getting RSPO certification. They are preparing all documents. And the other one doesn't have a plan, but maybe in future they will. 14 mid-sized growers across the 3 district areas. So we choose these 3 areas because they're the most significant in terms of planted areas. And we have 22 small growers that we covered, and workers, 103 workers. And these workers are actually coming from two components. One, we paired with the employers, and the other component is completely independent workers. So they are not associated with the growers that we interviewed. So that actually one mechanism to control non-biased sampling. We did community mapping. As I said, it's important to understand local context. That's why we did community mapping. We look at the scenarios in the district areas, and also to triangulate information. It's important for us to also get response and feedbacks from other stakeholders. They're not in Sabah. Some of them are in Sabah, but some of them outside Sabah provide more macro level of inputs to us to get reflection. So so these the three areas that we covered lah. Yeah. So these some of the stakeholders that we engaged. Some of them are here, and we would like to also thank the stakeholders for giving us your thoughts and reflection. Okay, quickly before we go to the key findings, just the ethics that we applied during data collection. Now, why we highlight this in particular chapter? Because as I said before, understanding growers is important. Unless we, if we don't understand growers, it's very difficult to put intervention. So any intervention that is designed either by the large companies to help medium and small growers, and also by the government, should actually consider at least the demography of the growers. Who are these growers, right? So I don't know whether I can see that. Let me just see from here. Okay. So the way we design the way we define large grower, mid-sized grower, and small growers, not much different actually with how RSPO and MSPO define, but they are different lah. So for large grower, the way we define is a person or basically a company lah for large grower that owns and or manage a palm oil development more than 10,000 hectares. For us, for this study, we don't mill, yeah. So we don't look at mill. So we only cover the large grower without the mill. The second is mid-sized grower, a person or company that owns and or manage palm oil development less than 10,000 hectare, but more than 15 hectare. And the threshold is huge, right? The gap. So we divide them into two. I couldn't remember what's the two, but the two is for us to actually see the difference between the two, because the gap is huge, right? Small grower is a person that own or manage a palm oil development less than 50 hectare. Now, if you look at the large grower, it's common. I think FGV can can confirm. It's academic exercise, Mr. Wan Kasim, so it's fine. They have actually established management system. It's everywhere. If you go to large grower, they have a management system already in place, including labor. The way they procure recruitment agencies, the way they run the recruitment the way they screen recruitment agencies, and they appoint recruitment agency, there is a process in place, including when workers already arrive, there is a process to receive and provide orientation, and workers are included in the workforce, right? So there's a training, everything is there. For RSPO certified company, the one that we interviewed, it's adequately exposed on emerging labor standards. So you name it, you can ask all the 11 indicators of forced labor, they are well aware. They know passport retention shouldn't be there, debt bondage, they are there. The awareness is solid, but practice we haven't checked. So I have to put disclaimer here, we haven't checked the practice, but awareness wise, it's solid. Now, reliance on private recruitment agency can be reduced. So they still rely on recruitment agency, but that can be reduced. I'll explain later how reduction or reduce this cost being explained in the report. But there's still lack of awareness on ethical recruitment standards. So this is something that in terms of the fees, so there's a little bit confusion there, what to be covered when it comes to recruitment fees. Workers abscondment is a common challenge for 2-3 large grower, and it's a big challenge for mid-sized growers. OGM, the operational grievance mechanism, is a norm. You can see multiple channel of grievance mechanism are there. You see hotline, you see grievance log, you see complaint box are there. The effectiveness of grievance mechanism is dependent on the way the company actually respond to it. Now, local workers usually are represented by union, But for migrant workers represented mostly by internal mechanism, so they have established their own internal mechanism. There's an election process, but level of independence vary lah. So depending on the state, so how much intervention by the large growers into the formation of labor organization. Now for mid-sized growers, it's not so much different if you compare with small grower. But for mid-sized grower, the availability of management system depends on the workforce. So if you only have 5 workers, you have 200,000, 200 hectare. I think it doesn't make sense for grower to have management system if you only have 5 workers. So they clarified that, and sometimes we have to consider that justification as well. But for management, for growers have more than 10 workers, they still don't have management system. But the one that we met, one mid-sized grower, having about 20 to 30 workers, there's a management system already in place. The management system is not as solid as with large grower, but there is a system to make sure that the workers' contract is signed. You will get your payment by 7 of every month, right? So there's a system to track that. And exposure to decent work is very limited. They are confined with what Malaysian laws tell them. So outside Malaysian laws, they don't care, right? But for RSPO company, because they're following the higher standard, of course, they will have to abide by the RSPO PNC, right? Heavy reliance on private recruitment agency. This is quite, I have repeated this many times, because you rely on private recruitment agencies heavily. In one case that we found, a grower hiring 20 workers, they didn't even draft the employment contract. They didn't know what is in the employment contract because the recruitment agency actually drafted for them. They have no idea. So the problem is you don't know what's in the contract, and you are actually a principal employer. You're supposed to provide that, make sure that everything written in the contract to be delivered and signed by the worker, but you don't know that. So the heavy reliance on recruitment agency is not just because of responsibility, because also you have, this is what we found, you have very less bargaining power with recruitment agency, because you are relying to them so much. And recruitment agency said, I put one person, the fee is 3,000, you have to pay it. So there is no negotiation. The bargaining power is very less for recruitment for growers who rely very much on recruitment agency. Operational grievance mechanism is not common. Everyone is just following the verbal complaint, right? So it's difficult to find in mid-sized growers that you find a system that track the grievance. Essential facilities is not there. It's hardly to see learning facilities developed by mid-sized growers. Hiring of irregular migrant is inevitable for many mid-sized growers. Because of the bureaucracy, because of the cost that is very expensive, they just say, just hire irregular migrant. We don't have choice, right? Workers are not usually represented. For small grower, there is no management system. We haven't found any small grower that has a management system in place. They rely heavily on experience. So what their experience told them, what happened in the past 2-3 years, or maybe the past generation, that's what they're doing now. Most growers are the first generation of smallholder farmers. So you imagine the first generation of smallholder farmers, they are 70s. So we are talking 60s or 70s. You're talking about emerging labor standards everywhere coming to us. They don't care. I'm 60s. I'm gonna soon go to whatever. Some growers consider palm oil as an additional source of income. So they are teachers, they are policemen, they are lawyers, they are doctors. Some are professionals, yeah. I don't care if you wanna cut me from your supply chain. I don't care. I have my own profession. I'm a doctor. So we just wrap up the land, right? So it's too much pressure for them. We ask them a very candid conversation. They don't care actually. If you put too much pressure for them, we just leave the land. This is for these people, but for people that rely so much on the land, I think they care lah. I think they will have to do something, right? A great lack of awareness on critical labor issues. They don't know even the labor permit, whether you have to have it before you start applying. They don't know, right? So don't talk about employment contract lah. No formal employer-employee relationship. There's no written contract. It's part of the MSPO, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and the PNC. You can actually hire someone without the contract. But the problem without contract is there's no transparency. I don't know what you told me last month. You said 2,000 or maybe 100 for 1 ton. No one remembers. No one actually put it on paper. So there's no transparency. So if you have a problem, no one gonna protect you, right? So that would be the problem without contract employment. Growers prefer to hire migrants on temporary short-term assignment and task-specific. So this is also another hurdle, because if the labor law requires them to have workers with permit tied with them, the expectation is that the worker will work every day in a month, right? But the nature for small grower, you only you only do certain part of the activities, maybe 2 weeks in the first 2 weeks in the same month, and the next 2 weeks you don't have anything to do. So what the workers gonna do? The growers will lose that because you have to pay, right? So I think the nature of task specific doesn't suit the employer tied permit system, especially for small growers. Whatever you do, it doesn't work there. Unless we innovate the way, we say, okay, maybe cooperative can hire a group of people and they can rotate. But the risk is the abuse lah, because you have no control of that. Sorry, I took a lot of time for this. Let me just go straight to the findings. So what we found inside. So based on the principle, right, we have 4 principles there. The first principle, understanding and fundamental principle of and rights at work. So what we found there, the one that I highlight in yellow, 1 of every 3 respondents receive lower than the monthly minimum wage. So non-compliant is already major non-compliant for RSPO and MSPO. Nearly 1 of every 10 respondents was a child, young worker. I'm not talking about children assisting parents. I'm talking about a child between 13 and 17 working, but not in the payroll. I'm not talking about children assisting parents. So they are literally working. 2 of every 3 respondents have school-aged children living on site. It is a common for children to assist their parents on site. So this is another category. They come maybe after school hours, or maybe during semester break or school break. They come and assist parents collecting those fruits. Yep. Yep. Well, as I said, the one that we considered working is the point number 3. Nearly 1 of every 10 respondents was a child, young worker below 18. So they work. They actually receive. They have a task. They have a specific task to do in every day, a daily routine lah. The only difficulty is to identify whether they are in the payroll, because usually they're tumpang. They call it tumpang, pekerja tumpang lah. Tumpang meaning you're just getting your salary as part of your parents' check roll, right? So it's part of that process. But they're working literally. They don't go to school. They work like 8 hours in a day. So these 2 criteria already fit the definition of child labor. But in anywhere in our report, including our research, we didn't use the term child labor because it has to be specific on individual case. So until they meet that criteria, I think we are confident saying that they are child labor. But even if they are just working children, I think we should look at on a case-by-case basis. Retention of workers' passport for safekeeping, for mid-sized growers and small growers, quite rampant. I mean, it's everywhere. They're still keeping that passport for many reasons. The other indicators of forced labor is the outing procedures put in place by mid-size and large grower, quite restrictive, right? After working hours, you can actually go, but there's a process that you have to go through, and that process sometimes does not actually make sense, and it will take time. So let's say if you want to go immediately because you have some family meninggal dunia or died or some, right? You can't go because you have to wait until the office open. If that happens on Saturday, you have to wait lah until Monday. So it's a restriction of movement of workers, especially in emergency case. Money guarantee for long holidays. So if you want to go back to Indonesia for 2 weeks, put a deposit 300 ringgit. Make sure you come back, right? So I think this is not a good practice. We told them candidly it's not a good practice. Sorry. So the second is employment relationship. Nearly 1 of every 2 workers irregular migrant, and our best estimate was actually supported by the industry association in Sabah. They said about 50 to 60% of the workforce are regular migrants. More than half the respondent did not have contract of employment. They don't have, so it's just a verbal agreement. As I said, verbal agreement has a lot of problem in terms of transparency and accountability by the employers. Mid-sized and small growers relied heavily from private recruitment agencies, as I said before, and they deduct worker salary from to cover the recruitment costs, including cost of regularization, because we have that process in Sabah. Quickly, Principle 3, social protection, safety and health monitoring was conducted, but conducted unstructured, especially for small growers. There's no schedule. It's very occasional. If I think I want to monitor, I monitor. If I don't think I want to monitor, I don't monitor. So there's no schedule. But for large grower, yes, they have that system. But mid-size and small growers, we highlight in the report, this has not been the practice. Workers raised concern related to poor housing condition, especially for small growers and mid-sized growers. Disruption of clean water, electricity problem. I think it's quite rampant, not only because of the companies, but also, I guess, even in the remote areas of Sabah, we still have the same problem. So that would be also an issue raised by growers. It's not fair for them, because MSPO come and RSPO come, the auditors come and checking on facilities, but it's not under their responsibility, especially for mid-size. For large company, it's okay. You can even develop your own empangan. You're resourceful. But for mid-size growers, how do you expect them to provide that facilities? Now, growers perceive social security as a requirement for hiring. It's just because we need to get labor permit, not because we want to protect them. So that mentality has been an issue, because that also trigger a lot of cases in Sabah where when workers get into accident, they wasn't given the compensation as stipulated under SOCSO or before the compensation. 1 of every 2 irregular workers is not covered under SOCSO because they are technically irregular workers, so there's no social security for them. Right? The last pillar on social dialogue, only 1 of every 10 workers was aware of their right to association. None of them, the one that we met, a member to local union, local union, or a member to any workers representative. Workers lack the vision and understanding of what and how union can actually help them. So they don't see the value of being member to, I'm sure there are participants here, including virtual, promoting for freedom of association. But I think this is one thing that workers stress. Any single ringgit that they actually get from Malaysia, they want to remit. So as much as possible, they want to remit. So if you impose if there is a association fee or union fee, I think they will need to consider that, because for them, even 1 ringgit is important. They want to remit as much as possible so that they can build bungalow, right, for Indonesia. So it's a tradition for them. Workers raise concern that their participation in union may result in employment discontentment. So it's not so comfortable for them to raise that, and the working environment between employer and employee is not so conducive for them to raise that. Quickly on the risk. So the way we design the risk areas, we identify five main areas. 1 is labor management, governance, and integrity. So this is the big chunk of the problems that are faced by growers, also at the same time by workers. And second one is on labor market dynamics, awareness. And third one, social compliance audit. I think I just want to highlight on social compliance audit, because we see social compliance is a very important mechanism, because everyone else doesn't have access to sites, but auditors have. For me, when I go to site, it's difficult. I need to get access. Labor inspection or labor inspectors, everyone else is difficult, but the auditors have access to it. So we see social compliance mechanism has a powerful, 1 is tool, and also second is the chance or opportunity to make changes. But we also see problem where we don't do it properly. I'm not raising question about RSPO, PNC, or MSPO, PNC. Maybe there may be some discussion about MSPO, PNC, not on par of the international standards, but we can work on towards improving it. But I think it's more important the process. the methodology of the audit process and the reporting. Because even if you have one so-so or moderate indicator to measure, but if you don't have the right person to do it, and you don't have the right methodology to do it, the way you choose workers, the way you put mechanism where the workers are not empowered to raise their voices, you won't get the finding. So I think for us, even before we looking at the PNC or principle or criteria, I think the methodology is important for us, and reporting as well. About labor market dynamics, we see growers, I think including large growers, they actually normalizing the labor as a short-term capital. I think that also because influenced by the way the policy is being designed, it's only maximum 10 years, right? So there's no opportunity to continue. So they also see that just short-term, I just give them the money and you can go back, right? So there's no long-term. So that also triggers the training, empowerment, career pathway, and other benefits to the workers, because it's for short-term. And also we see for mid-size and mid-size and small growers, we see workers as being disposable workers. So they are hired if they're needed. If you are not needed, you just jobless, right? So there's no security. So lack of interest among local workers make growers rely heavily on foreign workers, especially in Sabah, or migrant workers in Sabah. And that also relates to labor shortage. Now in Sabah, and abscondment as well. So abscondment in Sabah, one area that we found is that workers absconded is actually a form of protest. They don't, some of the workers, they absconded because they got better salary, but I think at the first place, because they are not satisfied with the way they are being treated, that's why they protested, absconded. I go to the other company. And that's why the every day when we look at the news, plantation has a problem with labor shortage. I think it's something to do with the way we design and the way we perceive workers as part of the company, right? So if there's no opportunity to work longer, then just 5 years, so workers are uncertain, so I can just move. First of all, they are mobile workers, so they move from one place to another place, right? So it's complex factors. That's why the abscondment issue and labor shortage never been resolved, even until now. We have many versions of our regularization program, but still there, right? Quickly, the way we so this is the risk lah. So you can see that. So these are the risks when we are not complying with that, or whether we're still struggling with that challenges. So this would be the risk to companies and growers and workers themselves. Now, how do we conclude that information? So the way we look at these issues from actually 3 dimensions. So number one, we see issues that are actually derived from system level problem. The problem that comes from shortfall in the policy making or policy design, shortfall from our labor market sentiments, for example, or maybe lack of documentation for the workers themselves. So the first issue that we see, the issues that are system level, they actually go beyond the business. Whatever you do, whatever the business put in place, they cannot resolve it. We can ask company, can you expedite the process of regularization? You can't. Because that belongs to the government to expedite the process, and sometimes belong to the embassy to expedite the process before the work permit being issued. So some issues are actually beyond business, and that would require not only government but also the other parties, including embassies, maybe NGOs. So that's what we park in the middle there, dimension 1, system level, and that would require collective action. Now the second dimension is the issues that are procedural in nature. So it could be because there is no gap on guidance of child labor. Maybe growers are not understanding about the children in plantation, what kind of activities the children can do, in which part of the plantation the children shouldn't be, for example, right? Gazetted areas. So that because of lack of guidance and arrangement, as well as institutional support for growers. So that would require government action lah. The last one is operational business case. So this is what actually lacking in the business, and actually business can do something about it without waiting for government to respond, without waiting for NGOs to expose, to backing on them or put some exposures, right? Business can do that. So these are the 3 dimensions, and that actually, so we have a number of intervention that we propose, but the way we present through what you call a theory of change framework. So the framework that we use actually serve as the building block lah for different stakeholders to come forward and to basically identify what to be for the intervention and what are the most strategic points of intervention. So for theory of change framework, we use 5 pillars. We look at the strategy, and we're looking at the second pillar is the intervention. This is what you can see from the report. That's the intervention. And dimension and actor, who's supposed to do that, with whom, right? And what are the expected outcome, and what are the envisioned impact. So what we want to see when we put the recommendation and companies are addressing that. To the end, we found 29 intervention, 9 placed under dimension 1 for collective action, 8 intervention placed under dimension 2 for government action, and 12 other intervention placed under dimension 3 for business action. I think I stop here now. Okay, so we don't have moderator for this session. If you have question, you can ask. Otherwise, we move to the second panel. Sorry, the panel session. Yeah, panel session. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Andika, for that presentation. It's quite clear, the salient points of the report, I believe. After hearing your presentation, one point that, excuse me, one point that didn't seem to come out quite prominently, in my view, is the issue of, the gap or discrepancy between national and international frameworks or standards. So I was, I'm sure you're well aware of this, but I was wondering, was there a reason? I mean, what was the rationale for not putting that as one of the key, action points for consideration in addressing the issue?
Thanks, Mr. Kasim, for your question. You want to respond, Philip? We have one chapter actually looking at the standards, and we have highlighted the gaps, some key gaps lah in the standards, including the freedom of association. Right? You want to respond, Philip? We have that in the report, but it's quite brief, yeah. Falik, you want to respond? Falik is actually leading that chapter on standards. And
hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Wan Kasim, for the questions. Okay, yeah, in response to the questions of how do we see the international and national standards on the labor standards compliance, we actually have a specific analysis on the chapter in the report, and we did a comparison and a benchmarking between national laws and also international standards, and we found that there are gaps in terms of, and also the lacuna in specific instruments that we have analyzed. But then it is part of the study to see whether the labor standards non-compliance exists or not. So, and we found that the lacuna is there, the gap analysis is there, and it should be addressed by the governments, and how the governments should approach, and also how the laws should address those issues in terms of prosecution, in terms of provisions, and also legal protection. So on the sides of the national and international standards, on the side of that analysis, we found there is a gap there, but in moving forward, we are looking into how this study or this report, this research can further address in terms of providing recommendations in business actions and also business risk and analysis. that is only part of the study, and we, as I mentioned that the lacuna is there, the gap is there, so it is the role of the authority. How can they address those issues? The initiative is there, the effort is there, but then there's still room for improvement. I think that's it from me. Thank you. Thank you very much.
No, but if you have follow-up question, you are free to do so.
Thank you for the response. So also Dr. Falik, so I take it that this is the gap analysis on the standards will serve as a basis for further advocacy, further recommendation. And when you talk about discrepancy between national and international standards, I believe the main stakeholder involved would be the authorities, because they would be in the position to make certain changes, including to the laws or things like that. And most businesses or growers, they just abide by the law. So we, as a grower, as an employer, we look forward to these advocacies being championed, because we do see this as one of a obstacle or a challenge in moving forward to uphold labor standards. And perhaps and I don't know to what extent you have looked into this, but perhaps one recommendation to be considered is for the government to also consider becoming party to the International Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers and their families, which would then in a way require Malaysia or the country to put their legal standards at par with international standards. I know the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia has made such recommendation, and I think it's worth taking into consideration.
Thank you, Kasim, for your suggestion. I think we have to look at that, from that perspective. Anyone else have any question? Otherwise, we move to the online. The question online. Ada kan? No, if no, then we move to the next session. Sorry, I give it back to MC. Macam mana MC?
Thank you, Dr. Andika and Dr. Falik, for a wonderful sharing. Now, it is my pleasure to invite our panel of experts to initiate the dialogue embodying collective transformation, reflection and sharing of thoughts. And this session will be moderated by Dr. Andika. Over to you, Doctor.
Okay. I think if I may now invite all the speakers come forward first, lah kan? Speakers here, by order of what you can see on the screen. Number one, no, you don't need to see that. Putus leher nanti. Mr. Shahanas from extreme right, from the Mr. Shahanas Akhtar Mat Ali from the Malaysia's Ministry of Plantation Industry, MPIC, and we have Nadia Kamil from the Malaysian Palm Oil Board, MPOB. And we have Miss Jodeline Mitra from International Labour Organization, ILO, who has been helping us as researchers and some government agencies to move on the right direction when it comes to labour standards. And we have Mr. Wan Kasim, Wan Kadir from the FGV Holding Berhad, who is also very experienced on human rights lah. Don't talk about human rights with him. He used to be with the commission for many years, and glad actually to have a team and from Suakam being part of the FGB. Hopefully we can make some progressive changes in future forward. And lastly, we have Miss Mary Ann Baltazar using her another head as the representative from the Sabah Jurisdictional Certification Steering Committee JCSC on Labour Working Group. So this has been the committee that serve as a sort of a mover and shaker in the industry, especially in Sabah when it comes to plantation. So now quickly about the dialogue for the formats. The session will convene from, it's already late, from 10:30 until about 12:30, so about 12 hours, 2 hours, and it will be divided into 3 rounds. So each round will take place between 30-35 minutes lah, more or less. And each panel will have around 5 to 7 minutes for each of the rounds. And no one use slides deck, right? Oh, Kasim, you use slides presentation? Okay. And then we will open Q&A after all the 3 rounds are completed. Okay. Maybe we should start with the first round of the dialogue. I think you have gotten the question upfront, kan? So the first round, just to let the audience know, the first question or the first round, we are interested to look at the allegation, right? So the growing allegation of workers' precariousness in the palm sector, that has been the issue not only in our press but also in Parliament, if I'm not mistaken, being raised in Parliament as well. And that includes Sabah, because Sabah is the second largest producing state in Malaysia. Now, how do we remedy this situation and progress from that exposure and that allegation, progress in terms of whether there are new initiatives being developed, being established, are there standard review being done either from your respective organizations, or are there policy adjustment maybe for Mr. Shahanas, are there adjustment policy so that we can fit into, as I said before, the demography of the grower, so that we are not pushing them to change, but we inspire them to change. And whether there are legal reforms being done in the past months, are there improvement in the independent verification or assessment, etc. So each of you will start with Mr. Shahanas first, about 7 minutes. Boleh.
Yes. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning. Thank you, Dr. Andika, for inviting MPIC to the event today. Okay, back to the first question. When we see the finding that was presented by Dr. Andika just now, I think it's not really a surprising findings, because it is already expected. And for the audience information, in 2018, actually the ministry has already done a comprehensive study on the labor situation in Malaysia. And it is found that the prevalence rate of forced labor in Malaysia is around 0.8%, including in Sabah and Sarawak, where in Sarawak, the prevalence rate is 1.3%, and in Sabah is 0.6%. So from the finding, we already know that actually the issue of forced labor and child labor is happening in Malaysia. And even the report we have sent to the US Embassy and US CBP through our embassy in US. And from the finding, we know that because of the 11 elements that was listed by the ILO, we can see the elements of debt bondage, the element of the excessive payment, the control of movement and everything. So we know it's actually happening, especially in Sabah and Sarawak. It's also include child labor as well, because for the foreign workers, they can also bring their own children to the plantation area and to work there, or maybe to assist them in collecting, the fruits in the plantation. And when we talk about the efforts that have been when we talk about the effort that have been done by the government and even by the industry player, we can see from the company's perspective, what they have done is quite, a lot as well. Because from what we have seen, some companies already implemented payment of salary using the e-wages in order for them to, avoid the issues of, that bondage. Maybe they pay not enough salary every month. So by having the e-wages, we can avoid that issue. And they also have grievance channel at every company, and even in the Ministry of Human Resource, they also develop a working for workers platform in order for the workers in all sectors to, to express their grievance through the platform, in order for the government to take action towards the companies or towards the certain parties who have done something wrong to the workers. And even the company have upgrade and repair the workers' housing to ensure that the accommodation also complies with the minimum standard of Amenities Act 1990 or Act 446. And when looking at Sabah and Sarawak, the only difficulties that we have to encounter is regarding the regulation, because in Peninsular Malaysia we have Act 446, but in Sabah and Sarawak they use different ordinance. Sarawak have Sarawak Labour Ordinance, and in Sabah they have Sabah Labour Ordinance, which is different from the federal government in terms of, the accommodation, in terms of the regulation is quite different. So it's quite difficult for the central agency to take action in terms of enforcement, because in Sabah, when it comes to irregular workers, normally they can come and go every day, because in the morning they will come from, the other border, enter to Malaysia, and in the evening they can go back, and every day they will just do like that. And from the government effort perspective, what I can share here is on the National Action Plan that have been developed by MOHR, and also the National Action Plan for trafficking in person that was developed by the MOHA. So by having this National Action Plan, we can use it as a guideline from the government side, and in order for us to implement it and to show to the USCBP that we have take certain action in order for us to combat the issues of forced labor and child labor. And in addition to this effort, continuous engagement with industry players is also important to ensure that the industry players are well informed on the indicators on forced labor. And in this regard, our ministry have already done an engagement session with the industry players since 2020 with the collaboration of MPOB. We make it as 6 zones in every state that we go, and we give them some elaboration, some explanation, and we also involve the officer from MAPO office, the officer from Ministry of Home Affairs, and also Ministry of Human Resource, to give them the clear explanation on what is forced labor and child labor, so that the employers or the small growers and medium-sized growers realize the do's and don'ts that they have to comply in order for them to avoid the issues of forced labor and child labor in the industry, especially in the palm oil industry. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Shanas. Maybe just a quick follow-up to you, Mr. Shanas. Apart from US, who else out there that the government engaging so that we can convince people that we are progressing? I think because whatever that we did, if they are best pun, if we are not socializing it, people don't know. So people think that we are actually not serious about making progress. So apart from US, who else that the ministry engage out there?
Actually, in terms of direct engagement, MPIC as a regulatory agency don't really have the authority to take certain action up until to the US sites, because we are not the right ministry to do the follow up, and the ministry that is really in charge of this is MOHA under NSO Mapo office, and they are the one who will do all the reportings and all the engagement with the US CBP and even the US Embassy, and even among the palm oil company like FGV, Dabi, they also have their own connections in order for them to resolve the issues of WRO, or withdraw release order. And from the ministry's side, MPIC, what we do is we always engage with our colleague in MOHA and MOHR in terms of giving inputs to them on regulations, on MSPO, MSPO guidelines by MPOB, and all the related information that is needed by our colleague in MOHA in order for them to compile it as a report, and they will send the report to their counterparts in USCBP in order for them to, to analyze and then to look into it, and then they will decide whether they want to release the WRO later on. Yeah. So in terms of engagement, what I can see our colleague is doing now is they have the close engagement with the US side, and besides that, they also have make the collaboration with ILO. They make collaboration with all the NGOs to get the relevant support in order for them to convince the US CBP that we have put extra effort in terms of combating the issues of forced labor and child labor in Malaysia.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mr. Shanas. It was additional question, wasn't inform him, but a good response, and I guess we plan it, right? We want to have a candid conversation. Puan Nadia, if you, you can go next and respond to the broad question.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Andika. I think I have nothing much to say because we are MPOB. We are working with, we are agencies under MPIC. We are working with the direction guided by MPIC. So we are actually contributing some inputs to MPIC in formulating the policies relating to labor. But what I would like to emphasize here is we have facing with these labor issues since 2014, and since then I can conclude that Malaysia has doing so much effort, and Malaysia has improved so much in terms of the improving the labor Okay, thank you, Dr. Andika. And as for MPOB, we cannot do nothing much because the issue of labor is beyond our jurisdiction. The labor related regulation is all about is under MOHR. As it is not under MPIC or MPOB. So what we can do best is educating the growers, raising the awareness among the plantation industry. And another thing is we can do is under the certification, and under the MSPO certification. Previously, we are not really emphasizing on the forced labor and child labor in that standard. But in March 2020, we had launched a new revision of our MSPO 2.0, whereby the principles stated that all growers must be comply with all the legal requirements that has been implemented by the governments, the state level or the federal level, and one of them include the labor standards, and all the ILO indicators are being emphasized in that revision of MSPO 2.0. So we are seeing that the importance of adherence to that labor standard. So every time that MSPO certification audit is conducted, that kind of the element is take into account. We really emphasize that in the audit process. But then, as I agreed with what Cik Wan Kasim said, and also what Dr. Falik said, there is a gap between the standard whereby in MSPO certification we are only we are only what we can say. We are only include the labor standard that the government had ratified to, whereby in RSPO they have even more standards related to labor are confined under RSPO. So the idea suggested by Mr. Wan Kasim for the government to relook all the principle is one of the good suggestion for the government to look at. That's it from me.
Thank you, Puan Nadia, for your honest. Yeah.
The auditing will be conducted by the independent certification body like SGS, so that it is independent social audit compliance. No, no. Encik ni, you want to add?
Okay, the MSPO certification process actually being governed by the Malaysian Palm Oil Certification Council, MPOCC. So MPOB involvement is only on the smallholders. We actually preparing the smallholders for the auditing, for example, preparing the documentation and so on. We are not involved in the auditing process, as what Puan Nadia mentioned, is actually by the third-party auditor, independent from MPOB. But in terms of the standards, yes, we do actually, for the first standard, MPOB was involved in the drafting the standard. But now it was taken over by MPOCC since we want an independent body to actually to take charge of the certification. Thank you.
So yeah, in university it's okay. We ask question whenever we want to ask question. Freedom of academic. Thank you, Puan Nadia, for your response, and Mr. Nick for your response. Now we move to Judy, so don't get surprised, Judy. Students and our society is asking question every time or anytime you want.
No,
It's
that's
please.
the essence of this, having the conversation on a difficult issue, right? So feel free to ask follow-up questions later. But thank you very much for inviting ILO to be part of this, and we've been working with Dr. Indica for several years already, and other stakeholders here. So these are people that we also engage with. So in terms of the what we see as some of the progress that's been happening, I would say that there's been greater engagement among the different stakeholders. I think everyone would could in one way or another has been participant to many of these activities that's been going on at the national level, but then also at the now state level. There's more slowly, there's building up of these engagements. But we would like to see, of course, more of this happening at the ground level. This is much needed. At the national level, our colleagues here mentioned about the initiatives like the National Action Plan on Forced Labor. We have also the National Action Plan on Trafficking in Person, and I would say the protocol, the Forced Labor Protocol ratification is huge, because then that convention of the ILO is a fundamental principle, and that gives the country the very specific obligations on addressing forced labor, preventing it, protecting the victims of forced labor, also improving, collaboration and engagement with different stakeholders, and it subjects the country to the ILO supervisory mechanism. So that's a huge commitment, and I think we have to recognize that. Also, there's been greater interventions with regards to not just awareness raising, but also research. Research is important. So this, when I listened to Dr. Andika present those very comprehensive, study, I would like to congratulate the team. These are very, on the ground, the real issues that we need to be talking about. Very context specific, and so we're just not looking at the different, like smallholders, mid-sized growers, and large estates as just, economic actors. But there's a very important dynamic there that we need to understand. That there's, the culture, the history, and all this different practices that when we deal with interventions, we have to really figure out what would be impactful, because, the transforming the industry into to have sustainable practices, it's a process. So I think some of us, we want like urgent solution. It's not gonna happen overnight, and so we need to really come up with like good plan, for the sector. And when we talk about the sector, look at it on a very detailed, process. Smallholders, there are very specific needs that need to be addressed, and there's definitely like policy gaps that have to be filled. Juan Kazim highlighted also that beyond what the businesses can do, there are really important changes in the legislation, for example, that needs to happen. So in terms of the gaps from the international, and then you have the national laws, but the other challenge there is how you transpose from the, like for example, there's been amendments to the Employment Act, right? There's the amendment also to Children and Young Persons Act, and these are applicable at the federal level, state. But then how do you transpose this into Sabah, for example? Because then the companies there are actually complying with the Sabah, they're or not complying, but they're looking at the Sabah labor ordinance as their like basis for compliance. That needs to be filled. So that amendment needs to happen. And looking at it also, the international labor standards, it's minimum standards for compliance, but of course you can always go beyond compliance. And I think some of the companies are already like looking at how they can also progress towards higher standards from what the national laws already are providing, because when they see, for example, that there's that gap between the international standards and the national laws, they sort of try to address to comply with the international standards, since they're dealing with the global market. And then I think it's also very important to recognize that even the different ministries, they have very specific mandates, but each has very specific influence. So there's very clear leverage that they can use. For instance, the regulatory bodies could use, for example, licensing their licensing function, or they have like resources on the ground to raise awareness, or let's say there's district level authorities that could be tapped, that could help also provide some community-based interventions there, awareness raising, or complaints mechanism that the workers can easily access, because we're talking about remote locations. We're talking about workers that might actually not have the communication channel to access like MAPO or other Department of Labor. So we'll look at what's in there on the ground and really leverage on this. And we could also strengthen coordination among the different stakeholders. And I think that's the topic that we're talking about, how this collective actions, right? Then when it comes to also like very specific issues like recruitment fees, labor migration governance, we go back to the National Action Plan on Forced Labor. There are clear targets there that the country committed. So for instance, labor migration governance system has to be established, and they there's the also in terms of having clear guidelines on recruitment fees and associated costs. So the question is, how do we implement a plan that's very comprehensive and very that went through a lot of consultation? So again, this needs collective action, because there will be a lot of different stakeholders that will be involved in that. When we talk about like very Sabah specific, we also have to look at the issues of the undocumented population. And this is a conversation that needs to happen, because these are the most vulnerable groups of people. So you have to, for example, the access to education of the undocumented children. It's linked to the issue about child labor. Without the education, they will be, be brought to the workplaces and then end up in child labor. And there's the conditions there that are, hazardous work for children, or let's say those are, their inability to access decent work when they're in the age of employment already. So it's very complicated. I know that I need more than 7 minutes to discuss this. I'm sorry, cut me, cut me when you need to. But also, yeah, there's always that they when they say, oh, not all work done by children is child labor. We have to think about this. We can't categorize everything as also child labor. But then, when we talk about child labor, when we see that it's really child labor, according to the international or national definition, then we have to address these issues. And I think all our speakers, they've already highlighted that there are child labor cases, and the interventions there would require, providing and not just the education for the children, but also awareness raising about hazardous work, which providing guidance as to what kind of work is allowed by law for which age group of children, and working hours. These are necessary, because sometimes some parents, for example, because for child labor does not just it's not just with the migrant workers, it's also with local children. So parents sometimes they just need to see that, okay, I'm only allowed to have my child work on this certain working hours and those things. The guidance is very important, and of course the monitoring, continued engagement, and giving them some support like technical assistance. But I think that's the second question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jody, for the sharing and honest observation as well as how Malaysia is moving forward. Maybe we move to Mr. Kasim for your reflection.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. Firstly, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting FGV to this very important session. I won't be presenting the slides. I'll just use that as some reference points in my sharing. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Dr. Andika and Dr. Falik for this brilliant piece of work, long overdue situational analysis, which Jody rightfully mentioned provides context and provides clarity on on the situation and what probably needs to be done. When I first saw the question that was posed, I find the selection of words quite interesting. Increased allegations of precariousness of the workers in the palm oil sector. So I'm going to interpret what I think, what is meant by allegations of precariousness of workers. In my view, what it means is a situation where the workers are in an unfavorable, experiencing unfavorable situations. They are vulnerable to their rights being violated, vulnerable to exploitation, being deprived of their rights and things like that. So if that's the case, then I don't think it's a question of allegation. To me, it's a fact that workers, especially and I talk about workers, I believe what we are focusing on here is the migrant workers. I'm not dismissing the fact that even local workers are exposed to these kinds of risks as well, but the migrant workers are more what you call vulnerable or exposed, I believe. So to me, it's a fact that the migrant workers are actually vulnerable to being exploited, vulnerable to their rights, facing the risk of not being fulfilled or being disrespected. But whether or not their rights are actually being violated, that's a different story, which needs to be verified, which needs to be examined, investigated. But I think we need to accept the fact that the migrant workers, when they are here, they are in a disadvantaged situation because of their greater vulnerability, as you know, in comparison to the other groups of workers. So how do we remedy this? And that's the second component of the question. I think we all have the answer here. We implement all the recommendations that is in the report. I think I agree to almost all, if not all, of the recommendations. The recommendations have taken into account context. I believe Dr. Andika and Dr. Falik has hit the nail right on the head. But then the next question that needs to be asked is, how do we implement? How do we ensure effective implementation? How do we operationalize this? This, to me, is equally important. So I think everyone should give due attention to the report. All parties, all stakeholders need to pay due attention to the recommendations and find ways to implement. Operationalizing it is key. Otherwise, then we won't be achieving our goal. So clearly, addressing this issue requires a multifaceted approach, and that's why the report has various dimensions, a number of dimensions, key stakeholders that have been identified, the business, the government, and there's that intersection between the two. So it's a multifaceted approach that needs to be adopted. It requires involvement of various stakeholders. But I'm going to speak about the responsibility of the employer, representing FGV. Employers, they need to be responsible employers. They need to appreciate that, workers, regardless of whether they're migrant workers or local workers, they are human beings. So by virtue of being a human being, they have all these rights, minimum standards that need to be respected and need to be fulfilled. There's no excuse. So one aspect that I would like to focus on is, and I believe it's one important piece of the whole puzzle, is on worker empowerment. Because whose rights are we talking about? And I've made this point in previous sessions. Whose rights are we talking about? It's the workers' rights. They are the rights holders. These are the rights that are in that are being discussed, that needs to be addressed. So in our view, who best to indicate whether their rights are being violated or fulfilled, if not them themselves? So employers, of course, they have the responsibility to put in place policies, commitments to upholding labor standards, international labor standards, to respecting the workers' rights. They have the responsibility to put in place also safeguards, controls, procedures, and processes. Dr. Andika mentioned about management systems, yes. But at the end of the day, it is the workers' rights that are at question. So who best to indicate, if not them themselves? But then again, there's the challenge of them not being in a position to articulate whether or not their rights are being fulfilled or respected, because they may come from a background where they don't even understand the concept of human rights, of workers' rights. So that's why we at FGV, we feel a critical piece of the puzzle is to empower the workers. And through what? Through a number of political approaches. Perhaps. Okay. So empowering the workers, what we have been doing is through two prongs, two components of it, which are, one is promoting greater awareness, greater understanding. Until and unless they understand, what their rights are, what human rights are, what workers' rights are, what labor standards are, they will not be able to tell if their rights are being violated or if it's being disrespected or unfulfilled. So what we're doing is we're raising that awareness. We're ensuring that they are fully aware through various actions. We have created, short videos to look at different components, to look at the employment, terms of employment, look at, rights of freedom of association and collective bargaining, right to participate in unions. We've provided, and these videos are very short and simple, in the language that they can understand, narrated, because we do acknowledge that some workers cannot read. So while we provide the caption, it's also narrated in the language they can, they can understand. And engagement with the workers, intensifying engagement, going on the ground, providing briefing to them so that they are, to raise their awareness. But the second component also is, even if they're aware, if they don't have the proper channel to express that dissatisfaction, or to indicate that, they feel that their rights are being violated, then there's no point as well. So grievance mechanism, which is also highlighted in the report, is also key. So what we've done, we have this what we call an e-wallet system. The main function of the e-wallet is primarily, or originally, to facilitate transaction of payment of wages, salary, and to facilitate remittance. But we saw that an opportunity to leverage the technology so that we can also come up with a grievance mechanism where workers can express their grievance through the phone, either through text or through voice recording, and in the language that they can understand. So the function has the capability to translate the grievance in the language into the language that we at the employer side understand. And we also, make the effort to ensure that they understand the grievance process, what they expect, what they can expect. How long will it take for a certain grievance to be addressed? How long do they expect the employees to come back to them with an acknowledgement of receipt? What type of actions that they can expect from the employees, and things like that. So these are some of, this is a very small portion of what we are doing, but we believe this is a key effort towards empowering the workers, so that they would be able to let us know whether or not they are satisfied with the experience, whether or not they feel their rights are being fulfilled. Then we can take the actions accordingly. So my time is up, so I'll just pause here, and then we can discuss this further.
Thank you. Thank you, Kasim. Maybe before we go to Miss N, this is a additional question as usual for Kasim. It's also a question for many others out there. When you talk about human rights, workers' rights, that's your vision for your company, and not necessarily shared by others. Maybe because of the, say, for example, if us talking from IKMAS, I don't see science department would make sense because it's not their field. So my question again, the same. How do you see the other division within your company, including top management like procurement, marketing department, operation unit, safety and health, etc.? How do you see them sharing the same vision as you envision? Because that would be a challenge.
Yes, that is a challenge. So internally, we have to ensure that we are on the same page. We have to have a common understanding, common reference point of what we define as human rights, as workers' rights. But that definition is very easy to to obtain. There's not much room for interpretation, because it's clear international standards have articulated the minimum standards. But it is a challenge. But what we're doing internally is, of course, we have to socialize. And what's important is commitment. As long as we have commitment, in my view, as long as we have commitment from the top, that this is the direction of the company, this is the commitment of the company, and commitment to what? To human rights. What type of human rights? International standards. So once we obtain that, and we have obtained that commitment, of course, there may be a minor pocket of certain areas which is still in debate. But I would say overall, we adopt international standards, and that is a commitment by top management, and that makes it a lot easier, because whoever goes against that, then it will go against the company's policy. Yeah.
Thanks, Kasim, for your response. Now we move to N from the Jurisdictional Committee in Sabah. N.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for flying me in all the way from Sabah. I'm glad to be able to put a Sabah voice to it. Just a bit of introduction of myself. My background has been mostly on in the NGO scene. I did a lot of child protection work. I also have my own NGO doing child rights related work. I've also had human trafficking. My background is also a bit on human trafficking. Currently, I am with WWF Malaysia doing social development work. So our work on palm oil is really, our interest is very much on the no deforestation part of, sustainable palm oil production. But today I am coming to you as the chair of the Labour Working Group. It is just newly formed, and I think it's very timely because if you know the situation in Sabah, we have a 3.9 million population in Sabah, and 1/3 is non-citizen. So it's a really big number. We have a big issue of irregular migrants. Probably half of that 1.3 million might be. It's estimated to be undocumented. And because of that big population, we also have a big population of children who are undocumented or documented situations. Yeah. So with this big issue, there's actually really little players on the ground. I think Jody have gone there and confirmed that there's not much work on the ground. And so I volunteered myself to start off the Labour Working Group in the Jurisdictional Certification Steering Committee. I know it's a mouthful, but basically it's a government, it's a platform which is government-led by the Natural Resources Office as well as the Sabah Forestry Department. They are the co-chairs. So the JCSC's position is to, I mean, the focus is for a government-led initiative, but through a multi-stakeholder approach. So which I feel is very important because the issue is so big that we really need everyone to be on board and to take this seriously. And so it is made up of the government agencies as well as businesses such as Wilma, Sark Kinabalu, and also NGOs like WWF Malaysia and Hutan. We have a few. There's a long list. I didn't bring that list today. But basically, I think this issue on workers' precariousness, I feel there's no one. I mean, there were 29 recommendations just now, so there's really no one answer, and I really think it really needs everyone. And on the ground level, especially, when I first went into this whole palm oil thing, I felt when I was listening to everything, I was like, why is it so far off? It feels very far, especially coming from somebody who's been working with workers, communities. It really feels far. You have all these certifications, you have these laws, you have these conventions, and it really feels far. But what is really the voices of the people on the ground, and how do they feel towards? I mean, sometimes I feel we come in as people who know it all. Like, okay, you're not supposed to do this. Not good. That's not good. But what? How do they feel? What do the children think? And so I feel there's a very big, important side. The problem is I feel it's really hard to get to the communities. There's a lot of I feel for me as somebody who came into this new area, it feels very hard as well to get to the workers. But I do feel that it is an important initiative that the JCSC has come up with. Sorry, I need to list down some of the people who are in the Labour Working Group. So we have WF, Wild Asia, Jabatan Tenaga Kerja, so which I feel is a very important player in Sabah, Sawit Kinabalu, and we have IKMAS as well as Suhakam Sabah. Yeah, so it's really new. We actually have commission the study so that we can kick off the working group in a more informed way, and also to see how, with all these different lens, the NGO, me coming from the NGO lens and people coming from the business lens, and it's really new for me, like really to see how businesses view this and how governments and the laws take place. And actually, for me, on a personal capacity, on a personal capacity or personal view, I'm actually quite impressed. Actually, when I went to the labor convention and I see a lot of businesses actually pushing for regularization, pushing for documentation, because in reality in Sabah, when you talk about the issue of undocumented or migrants, it's always send them away, send them away. And that's really not the solution. If you look at the whole history of Sabah, when you send them away, they'll come back. And it's all about survival. It's just about people trying to survive, to take care of their families, to give a better life for their children. So it is an issue that we have to face. And I feel hopeful that businesses are looking at it in a more, I feel, in a more progressive way. And I feel it really helps that certifications also in place, that people are actually, have somehow sometimes paused into taking this more seriously. But and it's the labor working group is really new, but I hope to be able, through the working group, we hope to be able to build more capacity on the ground. And I really hope that I'm also trying to get MTUC or the SPO, the unions on board, hopefully, to see how we can really be able to reach the people on the ground and people who need it. Because when we talk about apps, like when you talk about grievance mechanisms, it really feels really good. I mean, it sounds really good. But when you go to the ground and they're like, I don't really trust, like it might be what my employer's way of getting to know what we're doing on the ground. So there's that whole thing of, trust. So how do we make sure that all the mechanisms that we come up with actually they'll actually be using it, or they actually trust it, or does it really help their situation on the ground, or is it just things that we put in place so we look good? So so it's something that I feel like we really need to question as well, to improve, because I know there are people out there, there are businesses out there who are really looking into the welfare of the people, the workers, the children, but then how do we really make sure that all of this will actually help workers instead of just good pretty mechanisms in place? I think that's all for me.
Thanks, Anne. I think thanks for your quick reflection, and we have another 2 rounds actually. But if this second round, it's a touch and go round, right? So it's pretty much very quick. I'm sure out there, not just beyond Sabah, but beyond Malaysia, broadly, there are many institutions actually looking forward to assist, to support the transformation, especially on labor. I'm sure the same with other aspects as well. But they don't know where to start the intervention and in which strategic point of intervention that would be very impactful and useful for intervention. I'm sure brands, governments out there want to help. So maybe if you can say 2 or 3 points of intervention when it comes to labor, in which areas that you think that would be the most strategic and most impactful intervention in Sabah. I think the same in the same question is just more drama in the words.
Okay, if we focus on Sabah, I would say that maybe we should look into the irregular foreign workers that came into Sabah every day. Because from the statistic that we have, the official statistic that we have from Immigration Department, the number of foreign workers in Sabah is 124,352. No, this one is from MPOB. Data from Immigration Department for Sabah foreign workers is only 47,854 foreign workers. But from MPOB data, the number is much more than that, which is 124,352, which shows that in Sabah we have more irregular foreign workers instead of the regular one. So in terms of enforcement, I think the state government or even JTK Sabah should do regular enforcement in order for the employer, or we don't want them and we don't want to encourage them to bring more foreign workers which is have the status of irregular. And because of no enforcement was done on regular basis, I guess that's why we cannot avoid to have more foreign workers which is irregular come into Sabah every day and work, because they don't have certain threat that will make them to come into Malaysia by having the valid document. And for the MOHR side, I would say that they need to have more enforcement officer or more labor officer in order for them to do the enforcement, because from what we have heard from our colleague in JTKSM in Putrajaya, there are obstacles in doing the enforcement is the shortage. Not really the shortage, because of the warrant from the Public Service Department. They only have limited numbers of enforcement officers, so that they cannot do regular raid or regular enforcement. Whenever they receive a report from NGOs or from the third party, they cannot do anything because of the limitation of the number of workers that they have. So from my point of view, the first thing is the irregular workers that we have to look into in Sabah. And the second one, I would say maybe the wages among the irregular workers, because the irregular workers don't have the documentation, meaning that the agreement between the employer and the workers. So the employers can take advantage and they can pay whatever amount of salary to the irregular workers, and the irregular workers cannot make any complaint to the authority, because they also have some something that they have to hide, because they are not documented. So in this aspect, I would say that maybe in terms of enforcement, we also have to look into the welfare of the irregular workers, because they also have to support their family, and by having the binding contract between the employer and the workers, we can protect the workers by having the fixed salary every month. So maybe I think to have it that I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shanas, for a quick one. Puan Nadia?
Okay, I will agree with Mr. Shanas, whereby the focus on undocumented workers is very important, because for undocumented workers, when they are having difficulties or having some problems, there is no mechanism for them to express their grievance, because they need to protect themselves. They are undocumented. They are illegal in the first place, so that if anything happened to them, they have no right. It's not right. They have no power to say anything. So they are easy to be bullied by the employers. And a part of that, I will also suggest the government to focus on the children in plantation. Unlike the labor regulation in Peninsular Malaysia, in Sabah and Sarawak, if I'm not mistaken, they are allowed the workers to bring along their spouses and kids together with them, so that these kids are having limited access to education, and causing them to be labeled as child labor and working in the plantation. So I think the regulation need to be standardized. Is either from Peninsula or Sabah and Sarawak, so that it will be easier for the government to take any action or to improve the standard that have been put in place.
Thanks, Puan Nadia. I remember one of the respondent with the family, and there's another respondent without family. And the respondent, the worker with family members, tend to work longer than those single. So there's a tendency for many growers, especially large growers, to hire those with family, because family is they have the moral support for the workers to stay. And also at the same time, workers are more preferable to work in a company who have provided school, learning centers for the children, even the salary offered higher by another company without learning center. So how important education for workers, for their children, and that can be a measure for them to choose between the two. So these are the two lessons that we got from the field, which I agree with Puan Nadia. I think there must be some efforts to look at the children, especially in plantation, and the dynamics within that. Puan, thanks Puan Nadia. Jody?
I would agree that this is also a very important priority in my view. The regularization, of regular migrants, and how this could improve actually their access to remedy and support services. It will address the issue about access of children to education. The other thing that I think should be important to discuss is the temporary employment. That's very applicable to smallholders. I think you've mentioned it several times earlier, because the standard employment, it actually doesn't seem to be working for them. So how we can come up with like regulations of non-standard employment or temporary employment that would also promote decent work for the workers, because it's an issue of income security, for example, social protection, access to other forms of services that usually the regular workers are able to access. So there needs to be like a discussion specific on that. In some countries, for instance, they have like this non-standard employment regulations, wherein workers are able to also move within the sector or even beyond the sector, but then they have contracts with their employer, short-term contracts with defined terms and conditions. So there's that legal obligation for both workers and employers, and when there's the need to access legal remedy, it's much easier. The other thing is the value chain or supply chain approach, which is the important aspect of lack of resources for smallholders, especially in terms of a like technical support that would be needed on how they can address some of the decent work challenges that they're encountering, technology, like big companies, they're able to afford digital services that would enable workers, for instance, to report grievances. How can smallholders also be able to tap on their buyers ability to provide this kind of support? So there's that important understanding of how they can leverage on this, but at the same time giving them some capacity building. So it's a shared responsibility, not buyers and also the suppliers down to the lowest tier, with very clear, like for example, how what would be the responsibility in terms of contracts, procurement contracts, the monitoring, for example, the large buyers having engagement with the workers of this smallholders also to check on the working conditions. And there are some good examples that has been done already in other countries on how this value chain approach, supply chain approaches work. But I think now also it's about time this could be also replicated in Malaysia.
Thanks, Jody. Kasim?
Yeah, for me, two priorities I would say would come to the top of the list. But specific to Sabah, definitely the situation of undocumented irregular workers needs to be looked at. The issue is so complex that I wouldn't be able to begin where to suggest how to address it effectively. Perhaps we can go back to the report of the Royal Commission of Inquiry that was done, I suppose, 10 years ago, to see some semblance of solution to consider how to address. It's political. It requires strong political will. So basically, the state would need to come together, meaning, you know, the state government, federal government would need to sit down and really discuss how they want it, because it's definitely very complex. But until and unless, you know, the powers that be, those who are in a position to address this, really sit down and come to an agreement on how to resolve this, then, you know, companies can only do so much. We can participate in the regularization exercise that occasionally is offered by the state government, but then again, as Dr. Andika mentioned, you know, the process is owned and is under the jurisdiction of the state, of the government. But the bigger picture needs to be looked at. The situation in Sabah, the undocumented population, the stateless population needs to be looked at. Without looking at these issues, you know, as a whole, then we would only be able to address just certain components of it. My second point would be a priority, but this is more general, would be on the recruitment process. And why I say that is because the recruitment process is where all these vulnerabilities and room for exploitation, that's where they stem from. That's where they begin, in my view. So if we get the recruitment process right, then we would be able to eliminate a huge chunk of, you know, the risks that workers will face in terms of, you know, falling victim to forced labor practices. How do we do that? Companies on their own, and when I say companies here, I'm talking about, you know, those who are in a position, big ones, including FGV. We are able and we are undertaking our own initiatives, look at international standards to put in place due diligence measures so that, you know, the process that we undertake are consistent with ethical recruitment principles, engagement with recruitment agencies. So there's a process that we put in place. But then that's only for the big companies. What about the rest of the industry players? And this spans not just the palm oil industry, it spans the whole gamut of, you know, sectors. Yeah. So what does that mean? So it means that it requires intervention from other parties, including the government. And I'm glad to hear that under the National Action Plan Against Forced Labor, there is that action item on this governance, labor migration governance, which needs to be established, which needs to be agreed on. But then the more important question I would ask is, how are the implementers going to implement that? What is the timeline for doing so? Because recruitment is ongoing, is actively ongoing. After 2 years of moratorium of recruitment being frozen because of the COVID, employers are really, you know, recruiting and through these agents. And if we don't ensure that these recruitment process are in line with ethical recruitment principles, then we'll be facing the same issue again and again. I think someone mentioned that we've been facing this issue since 2014. Actually, it's way before that, but it was perhaps brought to light in 2014. So we need to learn from this, and we need the support of those who are in a position to effect those changes. So when it comes to recruitment process, there needs to be some guidance. And I think that action item under the action plan is very key, is very pertinent, but I believe we've yet to see the implementation of that.
Thanks, Kasim. Anne? Quick one.
Okay, so I have 2 points. Firstly, I'm going to agree with Puan Nadia. Children would be very important because they are very vulnerable, and they are in multiple layers of vulnerability as undocumented children. So I really applaud companies and CLCs for running the learning centers. Sadly, it's only mostly in the large plantations. This is very, very lacking in medium size and what more for small holders. So the situation on the ground is, if you have no schools, what else would the children be doing? Of course, they'll be helping them. The first sense for a child is, I mean, especially if you're growing up, is to help the parents or want to be with the parents. So naturally, they will be with their parents when the parents are working. And even if you look at the wages, people who have been working for 30 over years and they're still getting the minimum salary, really. Like 30 years and you're still 1,500? Okay, okay. Yeah, it's very, I feel it's very hard, especially how the life, cost of living in Sabah is very, very high. And what more in plantations when things are brought in and it's marked up even higher. So the cost of living is very high. And even, and some more issues would be if there is no education, and children, young girls come of age, of course they get married off at very early age. So this comes with a lot of other issues. And sometimes people would say like, okay, let's just like not have children in plantations. But how can you? I mean, how do you regulate people and whether they can give birth or not? Because there is a law of like, you're not supposed to give birth. If I tell women here, you're not supposed to give birth, how would you feel? Like, who are you to have a say over my body and what I do with my family, like, so it is a natural thing to do, to have children. But yeah, so the question I feel is, how can we make safe spaces, even in plantations? There is always a way. I feel some people would say, no, every aspect of the plantation is dangerous, and it is dangerous. When I go to the plantations, I see children running around with big lorries everywhere. I'm like, I wouldn't have my children do that. It is dangerous, but if there is a will, I feel there is a way. And we can have things in place to make the plantations a safer place for children if we all in it together. I like the song. Yeah, but so really, like I really applaud companies who I've heard having a lot of putting a lot of importance of child protection and child rights in their workplaces. So I feel that's important, and it's not only education. We should look at it in a whole perspective of a child, because as a child, to be a child, to be able to play, like, what would you want for your child? And that's exactly what we should want for all children. I feel there should be no discrimination against any children. And so it's not just education, but how about health? A lot of children in Sabah who are non-citizens do not get vaccination, childhood vaccination. So we had a polio outbreak just before the pandemic, just to wake you all up. Yeah, and this is after 30 years of no polio, and it's because of children not being vaccinated. And when some parts of society are not vaccinated, all children will be exposed. So we have to look at it in a long term. It cannot be just firefighting. And other than that, it's also legal documentation. So a lot of children in Sabah are undocumented. And for Indonesians, it's much easier than Filipinos, because there's 2 consulates there, while there's no presence of embassy there. So that's another whole big matter. But with the presence of the consulates there, I feel there is a way to make sure that all children are documented. So at least when they are documented, there is a right, there is a place where the children, if they have birth registration, Indonesian birth registration, then they can claim their rights. Because without legal documentation, you cannot claim your rights anyway. Your legal rights always comes with your documentation. So without that, without documentation, birth registration, you cannot claim your rights anyway. And children being vulnerable, we have to make sure that they can claim their rights. So birth registration is really important. Secondly, I agree with Mr. Wan Kasim that the regularization, and it is it is a big issue. It is a very big problematic issue of the issue of non-documentation, and it's always a very big issue, especially during election season. So sometimes I feel, is it really a big issue or is it just being politicized? Yeah, so that's a question. But I do feel there are solutions out there. There have been good studies. What's the use of all these academics really putting a lot of effort into the studies and we're not using it? No, so there is already some solutions out there, but it really takes all of us to come together. And it's not just, I feel, the federal, the state government, it has to be together with all the experts, academia, NGOs, community organizations. We should all be invited to the round table, because I've been trying to get invited. Yeah, so if you have strings for me, please. Yeah, but it really, I feel there are solutions. And this comes with a lot of analysis, a lot of research, so let's use it. Let's use the expertise that we have. And I feel they will be a solution if there's a will.
Thanks, Anne. Oh, spot on. Academic work not being used. I guess there was a study, even a World Bank associated report, less than 10% being leveraged or converted into policy action. So it's a it's a critical issue. It's not just academic. I mean, out there, when it comes to consulting companies and organizations, producing reports are not being well leveraged. Maybe not being socialized. Yeah. Now we move to the final section. Sorry, final round. It's about supporting medium-sized growers and small growers. So if I could remember that, and last time when we populate the information, but I may be wrong, but it's definitely more than 50% of the industry players SMEs, right? Including small growers. Now they are the mover and shaker in the industry, basically. These are also the issues where all issues about labor standards are actually concentrated, right, in the mid-sized growers and small growers. I guess Jody has mentioned about policy adjustment may be needed on labor or temporary employment. What else that we can dedicate in terms of resources and existing knowledge that we have so far, including academic articles or reports out there, to support medium-sized and small growers? Because if you do whatever you do with the large companies, but if it doesn't trickle down to the lower part of the supply chain, it doesn't work, because they are part of the supply chain. So any changes has to be top down and bottom up. So maybe I start with Mr. Shahanas. What else we can do to support medium and small growers, especially in Sabah?
Okay, thank you. For the final round, I just would like to reiterate that the government is playing an active role to help the industry player among the smallholders, mid-sized holders, and also the big companies, in order for them to overcome the issue of labor shortage and the issue of child labor and child labor. And so far, we have done many efforts, like the career fair, to attract the locals to work in the plantation sector, and we also engage with the Orang Asli department in order for them to to tell their citizens, to tell their people to work at the plantation sector, but there is no positive result from what we have done so far. And to reduce the dependency of foreign labor, and even the foreign workers and even the local workers, the government also introduced a few incentives in order for the industry player to take up the incentive and do something for them to reduce the workers that they have. And one of the incentives that I can share here is MARCOP, stands for Mechanization and Automation Research Consortium of All Palm, that was officially launched in November 2021. But so far there is no takers for MARCOP, because no innovation or no invention by the industry players or by the scientists out there to to create some machines that can overcome the issues of shortage of foreign laborers or even workers in the plantation sector. So even the amount of grant that is going to be given by the government is quite big, amounted to 60 million, if I'm not mistaken, 30 million from the government side, and another 30 million from the cess collected by the MPOB from the industry player. But until now, there is still no takers. But we are still hoping that there is someone out there can, you know, innovate something like maybe drone that can do the harvesting job, or maybe the drone that have, you know, laser cutting technique that can, you know, reduce the dependency of the industry player towards the harvesters, so that we can, you know, go further into the next, you know, next step of you know, of doing harvesting job in the plantation sector. And maybe in terms of digitalization, the industry player also have to look into it by introducing, like what I've said and what Cik Wan Kasim has said before, like e-wages, in order for, you know, every parties have the transparency in terms of, you know, the amount of wage that they will receive, the money that they can send back to their source country, because by having the e-wages platform, if I'm not mistaken, they also have features that the workers can send their money directly by using that application. So no need for them to go to the money exchange counter in order for them to send the money back to their home country. So that kind of technology that we can introduce in the industry can, you know, at least can reduce the issues that we are facing at the moment. And my last word, that I would say that the concerted effort among the industry player and the government is needed in terms of combating the issue of forced labor and child labor, because from the government side, we cannot just go to the USBP and protect the companies that, you know, that is having WRO at the moment, because the company themselves have to prove that they are doing something in order to improve the situation. And from the government side, we always support the industry player by, you know, giving them whatever, you know, whatever instruments, whatever, you know, whatever assistance that they need, so that we can improve the situation of forced labor and child labor in Malaysia, or maybe we can combat these issues in, you know, in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shanas. Maybe a quick one, Mr. Shanas. I think we still have time. I even until now, I still don't understand. We no, not you. Overall, right? We are reducing migrant workers, or we are attracting local workers. These are two different things, right? It can be at the same time simultaneously run. The other thing is about replacing people to robot, right? And doesn't seem to be successful, right? Because the other thing that maybe we worth of looking at it, maybe Mr. Shanas, is to looking at the welfare. If we can improve the packaging for workers in the sector, say you got pension lah, maybe lah. Dulu we had pension, right, in the pump sectors. Maybe you provide pension, that would attract, instead of just introducing a machine to replace you, or maybe reduce from 3 people to 1 person to work on certain part. What's the uptake from ministry?
I would say that there is a big challenge for the industry to attract the local workers, even if we increase the salary up to 2,500, because first, the environment, because among the youngsters, they don't really like to stay at the plantation area. And secondly, maybe, you know, the 3D factors of the job, dirty, dangerous, and demeaning. So among the younger generation, if I'm not mistaken, if they work at the plantation sector, it only lasts for maybe less than 1 month, and then they will run away and work at the other sector. So that's the challenge that maybe the government and the industry player have to look into. Because in terms of salary, I've heard from one of the industry player that even the harvester can get up until 6,000 to 7,000 per month if they are categorized as a professional harvester. So it's easily for them to, you know, to get 6,000 to 7,000 ringgit Malaysia per month if they do harvesting job only. But just imagine, among the younger generation, the local people still don't get attracted to work in the plantation sector. Even we offer them 5,000 ringgit per month, I don't think that we can easily attract them to work. But in terms of, you know, working in the apple plantation in Australia, I don't think that it's a problem for the local to go, because first, the salary is much more lucrative, I would say. And the second thing, maybe they can just tell their friend that I'm working in Australia, I'm working in New Zealand. So it's quite a famous thing to say to their colleague back in Malaysia, even though they're working at the plantation sector, working at the apple plantation, working at the grape, grapevine. So I would say palm oil sector is a sector that need to be rebranded so that we can attract more younger generation to work, maybe by introducing more technologies in order for them to become, drone pilot, controlling the drone in doing the harvesting job. So by having that kind of technology, maybe we can change the mentality of our younger generation and attract them to come and work in the plantation area. Yeah, that's from me.
Thank you. Puan Nadia, sama lah macam teh tarik dengan apa yang dekat kedai kopi. What they call? Bartender, not bartender. Barista, right? So local wants to work as barista, but exactly the same like teh tarik, right? But they don't want to be called teh tarik guy. Okay.
Yeah, just to add on what Shana said, that oil palm sector is very unique. It requires a very huge physical energy to conduct the job, particularly on harvesting. And if you were to look at the statistic, about 95% of the workers for harvesting job is a local workers. And we knew that for youngster, if we were to force them to work with that heavy kind of job, they are not really ready to that job. So regardless of how beautiful we package the job, it is still very, very hard for us to attract the local workers to involve in oil palm sectors. They are ready to serve in plantation as the machines operator, but that's not the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem coming from the harvesters and the fruit collector itself, whereby we are very, very depending on the foreign workers, and the foreign workers are very, very vulnerable to the forced and child labor issue. So that in order to minimize the forced and child labor issue, we have to reduce our dependency on the foreign workers. And what we are moving ahead is we are replacing the job with automation. But as like what Cik Shana said, in harvesting process, the topography of the plantation and the skill of harvesting the fruit is not easily to be amenable. It's not easily to be mechanized. So that we still need that physical labor. So even though last time we had offered them $1 million for them to come out with innovation on harvesting mechanization, but still there is no take up for that offers, because the innovation for harvesting process is very, very, I found it's very, very difficult, because it's very unique from one tree to another tree and from another estate to another estate. That's the issues of labor in our plantation sector. The next thing, I just continue with our third session. How are we engaging to the smallholders? I agree that adoption of automation and mechanization is good in addressing these issues, but yet it is only applicable to medium-sized to big-sized plantation. If you look at the smallholders, they have no financial capacity to mechanize their operation. And what MPOB did in terms of engagement to the smallholders, we had our TUNAS officer to help them, to help the smallholders growers to practice a good agriculture practice, including the labor practices. We give them a training on quite frequent, and we also provide a financial support. In terms of the MSPO certification, we also allocate them to the government. We allocate them some fund for them to certify with the MSPO. that's one of the initiative that we implemented by MPOB to engage the smallholders. But yet, we have to bear in mind the number of smallholders is very huge. It's about 210,000 smallholders total in Malaysia, and our Tunas officers is only about 162. So it's very difficult to manage the smallholders. It's not taking into account this is only the licensed smallholders, not taking into account the unlicensed smallholders. So the situation is, I can say, it's very difficult to manage.
Thank you, Puan Nadia, for your response. Yep, Jody.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take the last point that you mentioned about the huge number of smallholders. So that also translates to huge opportunity to create decent work, right, in the sector. If we are able to, to help the smallholders address the challenges that they're facing. So, and I think you've highlighted very well already the importance of looking at beyond automation. Some of the work really just wouldn't be able to be done by automation. Maybe some would, but then that needs to be also assessed in terms of feasibility. And this brings me to the issue about the importance of labor market assessments, really understanding what's the labor market needs of the sector on a continuous basis. Then the shortage for workers has been going on for years since this is unfilled by the local workers. So there's that importance contribution of the migrant workers in the sector, and that has to be an important target also for the government to ensure that the migrant workers are protected, because that is one of the key strategies to actually address the labor shortage, to actually address the issues of the smallholders, the medium-sized plantations, in terms of how they're able to harvest on time, and that translates also to their profitability, and sustainability of their business. For instance, addressing forced labor and child labor would take very I would say complex solutions. But then when you look at it from, if you're not able to address this policy changes that's needed, those that we've been discussing earlier about issues of undocumentation, I doubt if reducing migrant workers would actually solve the forced labor and child labor issue. Maybe it's a key target for, let's say, increasing the employment of local workers. But if you have like abusive employers on the ground, because there's the loophole in the policies, forced labor will continue. Child labor will also be continue if there are children who are not able to access the education. So I think these are just the key points I wanted to highlight.
Sorry, Judy, just now you mentioned about the temporary employment, and that perfectly suits the local context, especially for smallholders and small grower farmers. Are there any example in other countries where they employ temporary employment, and does that work?
Yeah. In fact, not in the agriculture sector. If we will look at the neighboring countries, in construction, for instance, in construction sector, like in Singapore, they allow mobility of workers within the sector. So, but then there's this very specific conditions, terms and conditions also that the employers have to abide with, and that gives them the legal obligations in terms of, let's say, access to legal remedy. In agriculture, there's Timor-Leste project that ILO actually supported, wherein using the value chain development approach, there is this agreement between the supply chain actors, different supply chain actors, in terms of how the workers that on temporary employment can actually still be able to access to have decent work conditions. So the contract is very important, but then a specific regulation needs to be in place, because you have to provide, for example, social protection for them. They're still able to be part of the trade unions, even if they're temporary employment. Yeah.
Maybe a quick follow-up, Jody. I think this is also important. This has been going around and around. If we employ cooperative or sort of like a labor contractor that will be responsible to rotate workers, where small growers can use the cooperative or the labor contractors to work in the small growers. Would that expose more risk, forced labor, child labor?
Yeah, without a good regulatory framework, that will increase the risks of forced labor indeed. So you need a good policy that would look into consideration how this could be monitored. Because for instance, right now this triangular employment relationship exists, right, in the sector. You have like a labor contractors, then the employer and a worker. There's no direct contract between the employer and worker. And so let's say if the Department of Labor would like to visit the living quarters of the workers, how do they do that if there's the unclear, regulations on this? So there's a lot of like issues there in terms of regulating that kind of relationship. But the temporary employment regulations could also be in a manner wherein you still have that direct, relationship between the worker and the employer. And but then there's, for example, there's the labor mobility. This really covers the freedom to change employer, and access to the local labor market. But then that has to be thought well in that matter.
Thanks, Jody. Kasim?
Can you repeat the question again?
Oh, yeah. How do we help mid-size? I mean, you have a lot of mid-size and you have organized small growers and independent small growers under your sphere of influence, right? How do we help them?
Yeah, so companies like FGV would have to play an important role in this. I suppose not all big companies would have the same role, or as you call it, sphere of influence, because I believe some big companies, they rely on their own operations for their supplies. But for like FGV, we have a huge supply base, and only 30% of our fruits come from our own operations, which means that we have a huge responsibility and a huge undertaking to, in a way, make efforts towards ensuring that whatever standards that we practice, that we uphold, are also adhered to by our other, by our suppliers, which include mid to small, enterprises. But how do we do this? It will take some time, because firstly is the socialization process. Actually, first we have what we call a supplier's code of conduct, where we any of our supplier would have to commit to adhering to whatever standards that FGV has put in place or has had adhered to based on international standards. They would have to commit to that. They would have to agree to be audited, to give FGV to go in and to make certain assessments, to audit their practices. But to me, the more important step would be to raise that understanding and appreciation. A lot of the existing mindset among these players is that why the need to comply with these standards while they are just trying to make ends meet. So it is making that raising that awareness, raising that appreciation, and understanding that these standards need to be fulfilled, and then also providing support in terms of building the capacity. So our suppliers code of conduct indicates essentially that if our suppliers in any way breach that commitment, then FGV has the right to terminate them from our supply chain or to take them out. But normally the approach that we take is we don't terminate, or we don't cut our ties immediately. What we do is we provide them the opportunity to implement progressive changes. But what's important is there needs to be commitment on their part. So when there is a non-compliance or non-adherence that has been identified, we engage with them, and then we make them understand, okay, look, this is what FGV has committed to. Your practices are not in line. We want you to be in line, consistent with our practice. Do you commit to this or not? If you commit to this, then we will provide the necessary support, and then provide some, work with them to provide some timeline so that they can make that progress. But there are situations where some of our suppliers, straight away they don't commit for whatever reason. So FGV, is forced, because of that lack of commitment upfront. We are forced to cut ties from them and remove them from our supply base. So this is basically, in broad terms, our approach. But because of the size, the magnitude of the supply base that's coming from that category, we need continuous engagement. It is a process that we need to continuously, implement and carry out. So we have a team that goes on the ground who engages with our suppliers periodically, and we have refreshers. So this is the approach that we are doing. And I would have to say that, companies like FGV do have an important role in bringing about this or in trying to effect change among the mid and small players.
So just quick one, Kasim. We had this similar scenario before when some companies started 2017-18 with the progress, right, improvement, and they cut off relationship with mid-size and small growers. And mid-size and small growers are still there and operating, and workers are still in precarious conditions. So cutting relationship doesn't actually solve the problem. Maybe can solve your problem, but not the entire problem, because workers in precarious condition are still there. They are still supplying, they're still planting, right? So how do we then, I mean, your approach is quite, makes sense to me. Like, if a certain level that you don't follow our standards, then we have to make decision, right? But the next question is, what happened to these growers? If you left them out from your supply chain, and I'm sure the workers are still there. I'm sure they're still unless they close the. So what's your uptake in terms of when you're cutting that relationship with small growers? What's the expectation then?
Well, that's why our approach of preference is to engage with them and to convince them that, this is how things should be done, and to make them understand why. Normally it's a lack of understanding, lack of appreciation. We provide, and it's not just from the perspective of the rights of the workers or the human rights, the social aspect. Sometimes what makes them also appreciate the need to adhere to these standards is what implications it would have from a business perspective. So it's doing the right thing. That's one, which is critical, which is necessary, but doing the wise thing in terms of what the business sense. It makes business sense, and so if they want to continue to be in the business, eventually they would have to follow this route. So normally what we find is, once they have that understanding and that appreciation, they will they will commit to at least work towards that. But of course they would need our support. But on rare occasions, there are, and for whatever reason, there is an upfront position to say no. And even after various attempts to engage with them, after that we are satisfied that they are actually aware, that they actually appreciate why this is the approach we're taking. But even then, they choose to not commit to this. Yes, it puts us in a difficult position. You're right, it doesn't solve the problem for the workers. But I don't see how much longer we can keep them within our supply if they continue to, take that position. So yeah, that's my response to that.
Thanks, Kasim, for that additional question. Anne? I'm freezing.
Okay, so I think when we look at where the small holders and where the medium-sized goers are coming from, it's really, as Cik Wan Kasim was saying, it's really on a trying to make ends meet. And if, with living costs getting higher and higher, and it's just about surviving, earning something for their family. So labor practices, sustainability is something, yeah, it's far, yeah. But that's why I feel even with this whole boycott of palm oil, among, I think there's some NGOs are also pushing for this. I feel it really doesn't address the issue on the ground, because there's a lot of small farmers who are really depending on this as their livelihood. And so we really we can't just feel like boycott, but what comes out, I mean, what is your intention of boycotting? Okay, against forced labor, against child labor. But then when you boycott, you deprive whole families, when they are cut off and all that, you deprive all families of earning anything, and children are even in more vulnerable situations. So it really needs to be looked into in a bigger sense. And so that's why I feel I'm really supporting practices towards more sustainable practices. And what WWF is doing, wearing my WWF hat now, is we're working with smallholders and medium-sized growers for group certification, because it's usually the issue would be for sustainable practices, it's really the cost. It's always the cost. So through group certification, they can share costs. How many players are in there, they can divide the cost, and it makes it much more bearable for them financially. So in addition to that, WWF also supports in terms of training, giving them training, as well as consultation, conducting gap assessment for them, seeing where they are and how can they improve, what are the steps they can do. And sometimes, even in this whole social, this whole labor thing, sometimes, when I talk about labor issues, even in WWF, they get a bit scared. It's like, okay, forced labor, child labor, it's like, don't talk about it. But it's there. We have to accept that it's there. And if we don't accept it, we can't do anything. And I feel it's really like how okay, we acknowledge that, but it's not pointing fingers, but actually see, okay, where can we meet you? Where are you? And sometimes, when we come in and we talk about forced labor indicators and child rights and conventions, it really doesn't reach them. And so how can we actually help them understand better? And I usually come in on a do no harm, do good, do no harm. So that's much more understandable for, especially when it's smallholders. It's really orang-orang kampung, no, villages. They're really, but actually when you talk to them and you talk about all this, there is a lot of interest. They are interested to know more. But how can we go to their level of understanding, go to the level of where they are, like human rights? It's really, what is human rights? And so how can we look from their point of view of how do we do no harm and how do we do good? And so I feel, and also another thing would be incentives that comes with it. So like with certification, especially like RSP's certification, there is incentives, financial incentives that comes with it, which a lot of them actually don't know. Even when you talk about them and they're MSPO certified, sometimes when you talk to them, they don't even know what is MSPO certified, but they are MSPO certified. So it's like, okay, what's going on? So I feel we really have to huh, look, look beyond just certification and all that. But what is what is really the understanding, and where are they? So and then these are villages, orang-orang kampung. So how can we talk? How can we be at their level? Because then that I mean, of course, it's like small, but always we always we have that apa sikit-sikit lama-lama jadi bukit. So even though small, we start small with smallholders. Sometimes they're probably less important players in the industry, but then I think we also have to look at it as a whole, our society, and how this contributes to the larger society, and hopefully with all of this, I mean, small efforts of collaboration between NGOs, government, businesses, and understanding where people are really are, and how can we meet them at where they are, and hopefully we can hopefully improve in our labor practices as a whole.
Thank you, and thank you all speakers. I guess we still have about 10 minutes. I have a number of questions on Facebook, but I'll open it physically first, Prof. If anyone has any question to any of the speakers, anyone? It's university, not recorded. Recorded to public, but we can screen kan? It's open. Anyone has any question? Okay, Irene. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Andika. And I think it's a very good sharing session, and congratulations to all the panelists for sharing their thoughts. During the first round of the session, I think most of the panelists talk about grievance mechanism, complaints mechanism, feedback mechanism, and some companies even have more initiative having that through e-grievance. But the question is that the utilization of this mechanism is very, very low. That is from our experience. And this is due to the lack of trust among the workers, and then they are afraid that they'll get retaliated if they complain, especially involving no serious labor violations issue. Um, so maybe my question is directed to Anne, because I think she has more experience working with the communities in Sabah. In your opinion, what is the way of no that companies can do to engage no the laborers, no the workers, to utilize more of this system? And another issue also is this system is not exist in smallholders. So the smallholders workers, there's nowhere they can go to to lodge their grievance. So your thoughts on this? Thank you.
I think okay, firstly with the all this stuff, Sabah's line is so bad. So bad. It's I don't know how you can get the apps running, one thing. So I'm not sure how it will work unless probably more telecommunication budget into Sabah. Yeah, so that's, and but another thing is when you talk to people on the ground, it's always verbal. They will always trust verbal better. And I think it's all about, it's a face-to-face thing, whether I can trust you or not. And there's the feeling that when they were talking about these mechanisms, and like I think I've already mentioned it before, that is this a tool of my employers to find out what we're talking about? So I guess it's a whole building of trust between workers and employers. So whether there is free communication, free, that when grievances are given out, is there any retaliation? Is there any protection for whistleblowers? So they have to be comfortable to make that the grievances heard. So I think that's really how when we're talking about building trust, it's really how do you do that? I think you would probably have the answer. But for and for smallholders as well, they also prefer, even not only in the palm oil industry, but we're also talking to communities about grievances, even towards our organization as WWF. How would you, we go to them, and we ask them what would be the most comfortable way for you, and it's really always verbal. And so when we come up with this grievance mechanisms, we really need to ask them on the ground is what is the most comfortable for you. It's really, I mean, even in WWF, we very much trying to do the FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent for indigenous peoples. So it's really co-creating mechanisms together with the community. So there's no one solution I feel fits all. It's a different level of trust and level, different styles of communication in each different community. So it really needs to start from the workers themselves.
Thanks, Anne. Anyone else? Question? Okay, I have one from several actually. One, I start with this question from Adeline Choi Y Fong. I think it address it's quite open question, but I summarize the question. The question is actually about legalization of workers. That has been the major concern, and it doesn't seem to be any solution. I don't know. I know MPIC, it's not your mandate, but how do you foresee you can address this? Because if this is recurring, right? I think it keeps popping up for many years, legalization. What efforts have been done by MPIC, and what else we can convince?
Hello. Okay, in terms of legalization, the authority of doing it is under MOHA. And the reason why they need to give the approval on case-by-case basis is because of several factors that we really don't have in our mind. And in terms of policy, maybe KDN or MOHA have to look into it, because at this moment we really need to utilize all the illegal foreign workers as our workers, because they're already inside the plantation area. So according to in the industry player, why the government want to send them? Because we have issues in bringing them back as a new foreign workers. So why not the government just legalize them as the legal foreign workers, documented foreign workers? But in this case, we need to sit down together with MOHA in order for us to see the policy. Maybe we have to revamp the policy. So it's up to KDN to decide whether it can be done or not. So we have no say on this, but we can just throw the idea, and we can just tell them, the industry players, grievance, what they need, and the issues that they have to solve. So KDN can make the decision. And one short respond regarding the contractors managing foreign workers, like what Dr. Andika said just now. Under the current policy, under MOHR, they don't allow contractors to hire foreign workers. So meaning that the contractors cannot just go to the one-stop center and request for a certain quota of foreign workers, and they manage the foreign workers, and they can send the foreign workers to company A, company B, company C. Because in one good example that I can give, if let's say this contractor send 5 workers to company A, 5 workers to company B, and 5 workers to company C, and the treatment from each company is very different. And if let's say company A didn't give them the right treatment in terms of the welfare, so who to be blamed? Is it the contractors or the company that the contractors supply their workers to work for a certain period of time, like say for 6 months? So because of that, I think that's why MOHR don't really allow the contractors to go to the one-stop center and request the quota by themselves. and they only allow the employers themselves to go, and they have to fill up the forms and go through the certain process in order for them to get the quota by having the regulatory agency at each counter, and we will do the processing and decide whether they are valid or a junior contract, a junior employer to have the quota. So that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Shanas. But that's exactly what we found. They use contractors. Maybe Malaysian don't like. I think we shouldn't put in the law. Then they do it. There's another question. Maybe to Puan Nadia, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned about social compliance, right? So the question is: there any SOP for social compliance? Are there SOP for social compliance?
SOP is referred to what? The method?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me brief you on the MSPO certification methodology, whereby it was governed by the Jabatan Standard Malaysia, and similar to any other audit, the MSPO certification is going through the same process like other ISO audits, so that it takes about 6 to 9 months, the duration for the audit, whereby the employer are giving a prior notice that audit to be conducted in their premise. So I think that such methodology is causing that the certifications to be labeled as insufficient strategy to combat this forced labor issue. First, because the employers has been notified earlier, so that they can hide everything that is what we say the violations. They can hide it first, so that they only show the good things to the auditors. And secondly is if there is violations found during the audit, the audit team will be discussing with the management, and the finding of the audits is confidential, and they are given an ample time to do a corrective action to that violation. And after that, if there is no action taken, their certification will be revoked, and there's no immediate damage to the company, whereby they can still operate their business as usual, except that their certification is being revoked. But if they took action on that violation, meaning that there is no issues. So I can see in the macro picture, the social audit is helpful, but is not sufficient enough to address this issue. What is more important for me, the enforcement itself, because regardless how many regulations that we implemented, that we applied to the company, if there is no enforcement coming from the regulatory, so no one will take action. So that's why I said that in addition to that certification, enforcement need to be in the focus. That's it.
Thank you, Puan Nadia. We remember last time when we went and met workers, and the company was very honest to us. They told us everything, and they showed us 3 versions of payslip. One is for auditor, one is for headquarter, one is for us. That's the real one. And the salary far below minimum wage, triple. It's only about 400, 500. It's triple from the.
Yeah, it's not on all pump sector, I guess. I think everyone is doing the same. Like the company, they only show good things to the audit, and they have if we look at the financial statement of the company, there are many versions of financial statement. This one is the stakeholders. This one is for the auditors. It can be manipulated. The most important is, I think, the instilling of the awareness and education, and also the strengthening of the integrity of the workers as well as the employees itself.
Thanks, Puan Nadia. happy to hear the same version. Jody. Maybe.
I
quick
think
one.
that these are the same things that we actually also try to advocate to look at it. That audits are able to capture only a point of time when they did that audit, for instance. But then we have to have a good mechanisms that would be able to capture the working conditions before, even during the whole employment of the worker. So even before, after audit. So that's why complaints mechanism are very important. And Hyrudin's question is spot on. How to strengthen the complaints mechanism that the workers are able to submit complaints, not just to their employer, but also to the government. That leads also to the issue of enforcement, which is very deterrent. We need strong enforcement of laws, because then it's the Department of Labor that has the mandate, the legal mandate, that could actually make the employers accountable for the violations, the labor violations. And auditors don't have this legal mandate. So that's an important consideration there. Also, it does not the private compliance initiatives don't replace the public compliance work of the labor inspection. So if you look at it, there needs to be a lot of strengthening on providing resources for labor inspection, because there's very limited number of labor inspectors for like a vast coverage of the companies, for instance, and also capacity building that needs to happen.
Thanks, Jody. There was a last question. Sorry. Last alamat. Block. There's a last question actually dedicated to Kasim. There's a question from Jana. They agree with Kasim's perspective of workers' empowerment, where there's education being provided regarding their rights and making grievance. However, there are inherent processes within plantation which promote asymmetrical power relation between workers and employers. How can that be fixed? So basically workers in that vulnerable situation lah. So how this can be fixed?
I suppose those power dynamics may have existed, as what you call by convention in the earlier days, and perhaps to some extent still in practice or still in existence in some parts of the plantation sector. But we are finding ways to address those power dynamics so that the workers would feel comfortable in voicing out voicing out. So, and this is done through a number of ways. One is through the grievance that I've mentioned. Of course, there is the concern that was raised rightfully on trust, confidence of the grievance mechanism. Trust needs to be built. It takes time. What employers or companies need to do is to ensure that what they have committed to in terms of the grievance procedures need to be followed to the teeth. So if they say they'll get a response by 24 hours, workers need to get a response by 24 hours. If they say these kinds of grievances will be addressed within 3 weeks, because of course grievances have different types, different categories. Some are more complex to resolve, some are straightforward. So and the employers need to ensure that the workers understand all this, the process, the procedures. And if employers or companies continue to stick to what they have committed to, what they have communicated to the workers, I am very confident that that trust will be gained in time. Yeah. If in our procedures mentioned, those who are found guilty of what you call committing a certain violation will receive a certain disciplinary action. If that's in our policy, and we implement that, we carry out those what you call disciplinary actions. Stern action is taken against those who have found guilty of committing such violations. Then the workers will see that this employer, this company is serious. But if employers just say on paper, but they don't do it, how are we going to expect workers to to be confident in our processes or to trust us. So it's basically up to the employer. If we believe that trust is important, which we should, then these are the things the employer needs to be serious about and needs to be done. It takes a bit of time, but with seriousness, with commitment, it can be done. The other platform or channel to address this power dynamics is through it was on our slide, is what we call the joint consultative committee, whereby workers representative are invited to a periodic meeting with management to voice out whatever concerns. But one challenge in the past that we have identified is the selection or appointment of that representative. Can be questionable if certain procedures or processes are not adopted. So what we're doing now, we have been piloting or instituting some democratic processes to appoint the workers' representatives, so that we can address the allegation that the representatives are appointed based on perhaps favoritism by the management. These are allegations in the past. So to address this, we are instituting this democratic process so that the representatives are elected by the workers, and so we leave it to the to the wisdom of the workers to choose who they feel would be best fit to represent their voices. So again, we have a set of procedures in terms of how this joint consultative committee operates and how it's governed. Again, we have to stick to the teeth. If there are concerns raised, and this point on reprisals or non-retaliation is a very important point. There will be no confidence or no trust if there is retaliation. We have a strict policy against retaliation. So if we find at all that there is retaliation, then we will take stern action. And stern action needs to be taken. Otherwise, they will not have trust in this non-retaliation policy. And I believe with this, in time, in good time, this will address the power dynamics that was mentioned by the lady earlier, Emily.
Thank you, Kasim. I think we have ended here. I mean, I just need to say thank you again to Mr. Shahnas from MPIC, Puan Nadia from MPOB, Jody from ILO, Mr. Wan Kasim from FGV Holdings Berhad, Ms. N from the Jurisdictional Committee, State Government Sabah. Thank you for coming despite your busy schedule. We know you guys are very busy, and we are lucky that to have you on board actually for this session in our university. May I now thank you again. May I now give it back to MC. There's I don't know what you call.
Thank you, everyone. I would like to invite the Dean, Prof. Aini, and Prof. Sufyan Jusoh to the stage to give some token of appreciation to our panels. Please welcome. Okay, first, I would like to invite Mr. Shahnas. Okay, next, Ms. Nur Nadia Kamil. Next, Ms. Jodeline Mitra. Mr. Wan Kasim Wan Kadir. And last but not least, Ms. N. Baltazar. Okay, thank you, everyone. Now, at the moment that we have been waiting for, the official launching of the situational analysis report and closing remarks by Prof. Aini. Please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and very good afternoon to everyone. Yang berbahagia, Datuk Sri Suhaimi Mahbar, our Professor of Practice, just come in with me. Professor Dr. Sufyan Yusof, Director of Institute of Malaysian and International Studies, IKMAS, UKM. Associate Professor Dr. Nolin Khalid, the Chairholder of the MPOB-UKM, Endowment Chair, esteemed experts, speakers, professors, colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen. I would like to firstly express my appreciation to IKMAS UKM and the leadership team of the MPOB-UKM Endowment Chair for honoring me to deliver the closing remarks today. I'm pleased to see the presence of many distinguished and expert speakers, researchers and industry practitioners, both physically and virtually, joining us in discussing matters that are of utmost importance to Malaysia and Sabah in particular. As all of us are aware, Malaysia is the second world's largest palm oil producing country after Indonesia. We just came back from Indonesia last week. And Sabah is the second largest palm oil producing state after Sarawak, which contribute about a quarter of the country's palm oil. Indeed, palm oil has been largely positively associated with rural development and poverty eradication across the country. It has helped hundreds of thousands of growers, including smallholder farmers and workers, to earn a living. Palm oil is seen as an important source of livelihood for many pockets of our society. From the country perspective, palm oil sector is seen as an engine of growth, contributing to no less than 2% contribution to Malaysia's annual gross domestic product, or GDP. Such great contributions have recently been undermined by growing allegations and incidents of workers in the sectors. Growers are associated with unsustainable practices and labor standards, as discussed just now, non-compliance of standards. For instance, labor practices that restrict workers' freedom of movement. Today's session has unpacked some of these issues by focusing on the Sabah's landscape. Having listened to perspective and insights from the expert speakers, I'm confident that we can address and remedy such allegations through close partnership and collaborations. As a public academic institution, UKM, and FAP specifically, we stand ready to offer our expertise in finding truly sustainable solutions suited to the local context and dynamics facing industry practitioners on the ground. Ladies and gentlemen, according to the program agenda, I'm also entrusted to officially announce the publication of the situational analysis report on labor situations in Sabah's palm oil sector, written by two UKM researchers, Dr. Andika Wahab and Dr. Muhammad Falik Abdul Razak from IKMAS. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate both researchers and hope that we can fully utilize this report for the best interest of thousands of growers, workers, and their children out there. And hopefully, this further strengthens our palm oil sustainability and resilience amidst uncertainties in the global market. I'm also made aware that the report is now available at IKMAS official website at www.ukm.my/ikmas. Please feel free to visit the website and download the report. Before I conclude, I must once again thank and congratulate everyone who have worked hard in making this event a reality. Have a great day ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yang Berbahagia, Prof. Aini. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the program. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to say thank you to all panelists, experts and participants for joining us today. Virtual participants may now scan the QR code for attendance. For on-site guests, lunch is served at the Sangha Inspirasi Room at level 2. Thank you once again and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.